horrific act in a holy place. IS-linked militants claim responsibility for a deadly suicide attack at a mosque in Afghanistan. British police declare the killing of a sitting MP a terrorist incident. A further easing of restrictions, a sure bet in New South Wales as the state hits its 80% vaccination target. But in Victoria, the Treasurer is scathing of what he calls ludicrous lockdown rules.
Well, it's time Victoria shifted gears and got back in the fast lane.
And after a 24,000-kilometre voyage, the nation's new icebreaker arrives in Hobart, heralding a new era in Antarctic research.
This is SBS World News with Antoninas.
Good evening. IS Khorasan province has claimed responsibility for a second suicide bombing in Afghanistan within a week. The latest bombing killed at least 41 people in a Shiite mosque in Kandahar, Afghanistan's second largest city, and came after a similar incident at last week's Friday prayers in Kunduz. 2 months after the collapse of the Western-backed government, there are now growing concerns about the Taliban's promises to deliver security, protect the country's Shiite minority, and stop Afghanistan becoming a safe haven for militants.
Piled into rickshaws or just borne in arms, the injured are taken away from the Bibi Fatima Mosque. After earlier bloody scenes inside Kandahar's largest Shiite place of worship.
The firing started after we ended prayers. Then 2 or 3 explosions took place. We were thrown towards the windows. Many people were dead and wounded.
There were blasts and then 2 men entered the mosque. One bomber blew himself up here, the other over there.
ISK, in claiming responsibility, also spoke of 2 attackers. Other witnesses, though, said they saw up to 4. This atrocity coming a week after a very similar attack in Kunduz, where at least 50 were killed. There, too, IS admitted to targeting a Shiite mosque, Shia accounting for around 1/10 of Afghanistan's population, many of them Hazara, the ethnic group that's faced years of discrimination and persecution in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
I would call this as a silent genocide of a race or a religious belief. This has been systematic, pragmatic, as well as, I would say, very organized.
The latest attack is the first recent one by ISK in Kandahar, the Taliban's heartland.
It's ISKP trying to demonstrate that no matter what the Taliban says, no matter its rhetoric of security and stability, it doesn't have a hold on security in the country.
Raising concerns too about the Taliban's vow not to let the country become a safe haven for militants.
And I'm afraid if the international community does not engage, or if the Taliban do not allow international community, this global terrorist organization will threat every single one, especially the region countries and Islamic countries where they have more access.
There are fears of infiltration between the rival Sunni groups. The Interior Ministry this week asking fighters to monitor their ranks.
If someone is found in any of our army units linked to ISIL, let it be known that the unit commander will be interrogated and the unit will be dissolved.
For ordinary Afghans already facing worsening hunger, poverty and economic collapse, sectarian strife is the last thing needed. Rena Sarampayat, SBS World News.
And in another significant development tonight, the Pentagon is offering to pay compensation to the families of 10 Afghan civilians killed in a botched American drone strike. 7 children were among those killed when the drone hit a Kabul residence as the US was completing its withdrawal from Afghanistan. The Pentagon last month conceded the incident was a tragic mistake, despite earlier describing it as a righteous strike intended for an IS target. The strike was in response to an IS suicide bomb attack at Kabul airport, which killed 13 US soldiers and more than 150 Afghans. The compensation amount has not been announced. A British member of parliament has been stabbed to death in what police are calling a terror attack. Sir David Amos was attacked while he was holding a meet and greet with his constituents. Police have arrested a 25-year-old man. The attack took place at a church in the town of Leigh-on-Sea, east of London. Sir David is the second serving British MP to be killed in the past 5 years.
A dedicated local MP killed in a church hall as he met with constituents, a crime which has shocked the region he represented for nearly 40 years.
It will kind of like shatter the community, really. Yeah, it's very sad.
Sir David Amos was holding a surgery, a chance for members of the public to raise issues. Police were called after reports of a stabbing and found the MP suffering multiple injuries. Paramedics were unable to revive him. A 25-year-old man was arrested at the scene and a knife recovered. No one else is being sought over the killing.
The investigation is in its very early stages and is being led by officers from the Specialist Counter-Terrorism Command.
69-year-old Sir David was married with 5 children, a lifelong Conservative who was popular with MPs from across the political spectrum. He never sought a ministry, instead focusing on his local area and issues he was passionate about, like animal rights and Brexit.
I used to travel home on the train from London, 10 o'clock at night sometimes, and you'd see David coming home from work in the office at the house. And he'd be chatting to people on the train. He wouldn't be stuck behind a book or a newspaper. He would be talking to people, and he was that sort of person.
At Downing Street, flags were lowered to half-mast.
We've lost today a fine public servant and a much-loved friend and colleague, and our thoughts are very much today with his wife, his children and his family.
We now have to come together in response to this horrendous act and show that violence, intimidation and threats will never prevail over the tireless work of public servants like David, simply doing his job.
It's not the first time this has happened in Britain. In 2016, Labor MP Jo Cox was killed by a far-right terrorist, shot and stabbed outside a library where she had been planning to meet with voters. Her sister is now a Member of Parliament.
It's really important that we get good people in public life, but this is the risk that we're all taking. You know, and so many MPs today will be scared by this. And my partner came home and said, I don't want you to do it anymore.
Following the murder of Jo Cox, British MPs were encouraged to upgrade their personal security, but many were reluctant to change the way they conducted their weekly meetings with members of the public, believing that it is a key part of their job. Sir David's friends say he didn't want to be removed from the people he represented.
David, of all people, would not have wanted this to result in MPs withdrawing further from the public, doing stuff by Zoom instead of face-to-face, having screens, whatever it might be. That would have been the very last thing that David Amos would ever have wanted.
In his published diaries, Sir David discussed the danger faced by MPs. It could happen to any one of us, he wrote. He knew the job came with risks, but he considered them risks worth taking in order to properly serve the public.
And our chief international correspondent, Ben Lewis, joins us now live from Essex. Ben, good evening to you. Do we know anything more about the man in custody?
Anton, good evening. It's understood that the 25-year-old man is a British national of Somali origin. In the early hours of the morning here, local time, police confirm this is being treated as a terrorist incident and they are looking to possible links to Islamist extremism. At the moment, 2 properties in London are being searched in connection with the investigation. One of the key questions for investigators will be why Sir David Amos? He was not nationally known, very well known locally, but didn't have a huge profile outside of his constituency, nor was he a particularly controversial figure in British politics. Anton, Britain's Home Secretary, has announced that a full-scale review of security for lawmakers will be undertaken.
That is the latest on that British killing. Ben Lewis updating us live from Essex. Back home, a 15-year-old girl with COVID-19 and other health conditions has died in Victoria. She was one of 7 COVID-linked deaths recorded in the state in the past 24 hours. Daily case numbers dropped below 2,000, but only just. New South Wales reported 319 infections and 2 deaths. The ACT had 20, its lowest daily tally in 18 days. Well, despite those high numbers in Victoria, the Treasurer has lashed out at the Andrews government, labelling lockdown rules ludicrous and unacceptable.
3 generations of one family getting vaccinated at a pop-up clinic in Melbourne's southeast, where COVID-19 case numbers are growing.
Which arm would you prefer to do?
4 more members of the family plan to get vaccinated here.
I think it's a good one for us, and they look after very well.
As Victoria hurtles towards 70% and 80% vaccination targets, its roadmap out of lockdown is under attack.
Victorians have done the right thing. It's now time that the government gave back their freedoms and their lives.
The Treasurer questioning why New South Wales residents will be able to visit regional Victoria before Melburnians can.
It's a ludicrous and unacceptable situation.
Seemingly no change to the roadmap on the cards, though.
As we start to get to those easing milestones, this isn't going to be a great big freedom day where everything can be forgotten and we can all go back to normal.
A 15-year-old girl with COVID-19 and other health conditions has become the youngest Victorian to die during the current outbreak. Pressure is growing on the state's healthcare system, with more than 100 additional COVID-19 patients hospitalised in the last 24 hours. It brings the total in hospital to 798, 163 in ICU, 106 on ventilators, 89% not fully vaccinated. Elective surgery has been paused in preparation for an influx of coronavirus patients. Chase Arneson needs an ear tumour removed. The deferral could cost him some of his hearing.
It might mean that the delay makes it even a bigger problem in the future.
This weekend may be the last Melburnians spend in lockdown, with the Premier expected to announce the date for reopening tomorrow. Philippa Carisbrook, SBS World News.
And police have arrested 57 people in Melbourne as anti-lockdown and anti-vaccine protesters again attempted to congregate. As frustrations simmer in parts of Victoria, New South Wales is celebrating after hitting its 80% double-dose vaccination target on its first weekend out of lockdown. That means the state is now preparing to wind back even more restrictions.
From fabulous frocks to magnificent millinery, Sydney-siders donned their finest ensembles for a day at the races. New South Wales galloping towards life after lockdown.
It feels amazing. It feels, you got your life back.
Cannot wait. I feel like it's been forever.
Oh, it's fantastic to be out. It's a great event. It's a great event for Sydney.
With 10,000 fully vaccinated punters attending the sold-out Everest Day, it's the state's first major event since emerging from lockdown and its first test of living with COVID.
Friends that have gathered and have not been able to gather for so long, this is incredibly exciting. This is the race that is breaking the hibernation.
Also shaking off lockdown shackles, real estate agencies are charging ahead in a bid to get the property market back on track. The return of on-site auctions saw homes go under the hammer for the first time in 16 weeks.
The online's been very successful, of course, during the last 3.5 months, but there's nothing like an on-site auction. You know, the real buzz, the feel, and getting the crowds back.
Getting people back is the focus of airlines now scrambling to boost capacity, following yesterday's announcement that international arrivals will no longer have to quarantine from November the 1st, setting the scene for long-awaited family reunions.
Not having my family here throughout the pandemic has been really, really hard. Unfortunately, I lost a baby last year, and obviously them being on the other side of the world meant that I just couldn't see them and couldn't be supported from them.
It's a chance for loved ones to meet new members of the family for the very first time.
My mum said yesterday that she's not sure who she's going to squeeze first, me or Evie.
Singapore Airlines is just one international carrier trying to meet demand, announcing 32,000 tickets for the Singapore-Sydney leg between now and Christmas. Other airlines are expected to follow. With New South Wales hitting the 80% double-dose vaccination target late this afternoon, the next stage of reopening will go ahead on Monday. Caps on weddings and funerals will be lifted, 20 visitors will be allowed inside a home, and up to 50 people can gather outdoors. Rochelle Harrison-Pless, SBS World News.
There are no new locally acquired cases in Tasmania on the first full day of a snap 3-day lockdown in the state's south, including Hobart. But Premier Peter Gutwein says the next 48 hours are critical. The lockdown was sparked by a COVID-positive man from New South Wales who escaped hotel quarantine and spent 18 hours in the community. So far, 158 primary close contacts have been identified. There were more than 1,400 COVID tests conducted yesterday, a record number for Tasmania. And southern Tasmania has been declared a COVID hotspot by Queensland. Anyone arriving from the 12 Tasmanian LGAs in lockdown after 1 a.m. on Sunday will be required to go into hotel quarantine. Queenslanders are also being advised to avoid travel to Tasmania, while the state's treasurer today described the New South Wales government's decision to scrap hotel quarantine for vaccinated arrivals as a curveball.
We're considering what's happening in other states every day, but we've had a bit of a curveball yesterday, this announcement by the New South Wales government that it seems the Prime Minister didn't know about. But we're obviously monitoring very carefully what's happening in New South Wales and Victoria. We're seeing a real-time experiment in New South Wales.
And Queenslanders are again being urged to get vaccinated, with pop-up hubs opening at Bunnings stores across Queensland this weekend. And anti-vaccine protesters have taken to the streets of Brisbane at a so-called Freedom Day rally. There was a heavy police presence as protesters marched through the city centre. From today, fully vaccinated ACT residents can visit additional areas of New South Wales after a further easing of travel restrictions. Canberrans are now able to travel freely to parts of the New South Wales South Coast, Southern Highlands and Snowy Mountains without having to quarantine on their return. Taking a look at the national vaccine rollout now, more than 32 million doses have now been administered in Australia, an increase of 301,000 over the past 24 hours. More than 84% of people in Australia able to receive a dose have had at least one, and 67% have received a second dose. And this is the breakdown across the country. As we reported earlier, New South Wales today ticked over to the all-important 80% second dose statistic, a development that will be reflected in tomorrow's figures. The ACT has the highest first dose statistic. Western Australia and Queensland are still lagging behind, but they're pushing closer to getting 60% of their populations over 16 fully vaccinated. Coming up next, homes and temples come crashing down as a deadly earthquake hits Bali. Desperation at the border, the migrants stranded at the edge of the European Union. And why Virgin Galactic has delayed its first commercial flight into space. Lebanon has detained 19 people in connection with deadly gun battles in the centre of Beirut on Thursday. 7 Shiite Muslims were killed as people gathered for a protest against the judge investigating last year's devastating port explosion. The clashes were the worst for more than a decade and have raised fears of further sectarian violence.
Gunfire echoes across Beirut for a second day, punctuating the funerals of those killed on Thursday. In a country awash with weapons, it's not uncommon, but Beirut is a city on edge. And amid the grief and anger, there's talk that this won't be the end of it. Thursday's bloodshed has reopened old wounds. All those killed were Shiites, gathering for a protest against Judge Tarek Bitar, who is leading the inquiry into last year's port explosion. Shiite leaders accuse him of bias and want him removed. They say supporters of the Christian Lebanese Forces Party opened fire as demonstrators gathered. They in turn accuse the Shiite parties of trying to foment unrest. Whichever side started it, Mariam Farhat was caught in the middle.
جاء التقنيص من البنايات منقبانا قنصوها على قلب البيت. هي بالبيت تقنصت. قتلوها عم 5 أطفال صبية. اخترب بيته ابنه شو بيعمل؟
The shooting lasted for more than 4 hours. It was centred on a junction where Muslim and Christian neighbourhoods meet.
أحداث مؤسفة صارت بتأكد أنه اليوم في مؤامرة على هذا البلد، مؤامرة مخطط لها لجر الغبيري وعين الرماني لفتنة تمتد على مستوى الوطن.
Many Lebanese support the investigation into last year's explosion, wanting answers to years of mismanagement that have left the country reeling from the worst economic crisis in more than a century. Seasoned observers blame Lebanon's unwieldy power-sharing system.
You will always get these confrontations. Sometimes they're major, sometimes they're minor. The political system in Lebanon has not been able to create a peaceful, credible, and conclusive mechanism by which everybody has a share of power, but also responds to the will of the people through elections and other means.
Hezbollah says it won't be dragged into a civil war, but one of its senior leaders vowed that the blood of its martyrs will not be spilled in vain. An ominous warning at a pivotal time. Nick Wells, SBS World News.
3 people, including a toddler, have died and 7 others were injured after an earthquake and aftershocks hit the Indonesian resort island of Bali this morning. The initial magnitude 4.8 quake was centred in the port town of Singaraja. An almost equally strong aftershock followed. The earthquake triggered landslides in a hilly district, killing 2 and cutting off access to several villages. A 3-year-old girl was killed by falling debris as homes and temples were toppled in the area closest to the epicentre. Australian authorities have seized the largest heroin shipment ever detected on our shores. A Malaysian national has been arrested after 450 kilograms of the substance was found hidden inside a sea freight container of tiles sent to Melbourne. Federal police say the operation preserved an estimated 225 lives. China's president could be a no-show at the upcoming COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. According to British media, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been told Xi Jinping is unlikely to attend. Beijing is yet to publicly confirm this. Leaders from around the world will gather together in the Scottish city in a few weeks' time to discuss action on minimising global warming. Xi's failure to attend could signal a refusal from China to set new climate change goals. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison confirmed yesterday that he will go to Glasgow. And with just 2 weeks to go until COP26, the cornerstone of US President Joe Biden's plan to cut emissions is in peril. At the insistence of one of the Democratic Party's own senators, the vital program appears likely to be dropped from much fought-over legislation.
At a childcare centre in Connecticut, President Biden making new friends. A hug from one youngster, just not for his $3.5 trillion Build Back Better agenda from all of his colleagues.
To be honest with you, we're probably not going to get $3.5 trillion this year. We're going to get something less than that. But I'm going to negotiate. I'm going to get it done with the grace of God.
The $3.5 trillion covers a range of social safety net measures, but also the centrepiece of Joe Biden's emissions-cutting agenda. The proposed Clean Electricity Performance Program has a $150 billion price tag. It rewards power companies that switch from burning fossil fuels to clean sources, including solar and wind, and penalises those companies that don't. The left is keen.
What we must do and intend to do in this bill is spend hundreds of billions of dollars transforming our energy system so that we can save this planet for our kids and future generations.
But moderate Democratic Senators Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin have been holding off. Senator Manchin is opposed to the size.
My number's been 1.5.
The senator from coal-producing state West Virginia also specifically opposed to the Clean Electricity Program, which now appears likely to be cut. Climate activist Leah Stokes, who's been advising Senate Democrats, tonight tweeting, The Clean Electricity Performance Program is the most important part of the climate bill when it comes to cutting pollution. No climate, no deal. After a summer of devastating wildfires in the west, whose smoke stretched all the way east, Democrats had expected President Biden would be heading to COP26 with legislative wins on climate, in keeping with the tone he set on the first day in office.
We're going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord as of today.
Instead, as the First Lady campaigned for 2 Democrat governors fighting for re-election, there's dread of the electoral consequences of inaction.
I hope the House will get that to President Biden's desk ASAP. It will really help here.
Joe Biden, returning from Connecticut, making light of the suggestion he should simply get Senators Sanders and Manchin in the same room to work it out.
No problem. I can do that, not a problem.
Magnanimous, but still in search of a deal between congressional Democrats on the environment. Pruluan, SBS World News.
The United States will reopen its borders to fully vaccinated travellers from 33 countries early next month. As part of the new rules announced by the White House, vaccinated people who have had a negative test in the 72 hours before travelling will be allowed to enter.
The spirit of Australia touching down in LA. Soon, vaccinated travellers will be allowed to enter the US by air and land via Mexico and Canada. White House Assistant Press Secretary Kevin Munoz saying on Twitter, the US's new travel policy that requires vaccination for foreign national travellers to the United States will begin on November 8. A boost also for vaccination within the US. The Food and Drug Administration approving a second booster shot of the single jab Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Another dose of Moderna also approved for Americans over 65 and those with high-risk illnesses. In New Zealand today, a Super Saturday Vaxathon. Community events televised live as the nation got vaccinated against COVID-19.
Been a bumpy year due to COVID coming back, with lockdown happening.
Dunedin locals getting on board buses for the jab.
It was pretty good, yeah. Easy in and out.
COVID may have broken through New Zealand's tough quarantine borders, but today, Kiwis broke a vaccination record.
We have now hit 100,019 vaccinations today, which is awesome.
Yes, baby. Yeah.
But let's not stop there.
With centres open late, it's hoped 150,000 New Zealanders will get vaccinated today. In the Philippines, they're vaccinating 12 to 17-year-olds who have underlying health conditions. So far, 60 teens have been given their first dose of Pfizer.
Ako naman po sa akin po, kasi po naglo-look forward na po ako na mabalik na po yung online classes, ay yung face-to-face classes.
South Korea is developing a strategy to live with COVID. From Monday, curfews will lift that have been limiting businesses' opening hours.
백신 패스와 같은 새로운 방역 관리 방법도 검토해야 할 것입니다.
Some Italians are protesting against their new requirement for a COVID pass. All workers must use what is called a green pass. It shows proof of vaccination, a negative test, or recent recovery from COVID. Felicity Ogilvie, SBS World News.
Poland's government is close to approving a $550 million border wall with Belarus in a bid to stem the growing number of migrants crossing into the EU. Hundreds of asylum seekers are already stranded in an exclusion zone near the border, roughing it in freezing conditions in the wilderness.
Freezing, starving and losing hope. We found this Iranian couple through local activists who answered their call for help in the middle of the night. They had been sitting for hours under a tree near the eastern Polish village of Klebenka. The woman told us she had just lost her unborn child.
I tumbled 6 days ago and fell down. I bled, and now I am not pregnant anymore.
The couple say they've been pushed back and forth in the sealed-off border zone between Poland and Belarus for 10 days after leaving Minsk.
The Belarusian police took all the money we gave them to buy us food and to activate our prepaid SIM cards, but they never brought us anything. They emptied our pockets and at night they took us by force to the border. We have now spent 3 days in the forest.
These volunteers who've left their own children home alone to come and help, give them food and water and try to get them warm.
For us, it's like watching a tsunami coming in. And we just catch the drops and try to help the drops, which are human beings, so we cannot ignore them. But we cannot stop that tsunami.
The volunteers call the border guards, who arrive nearly 3 hours after us. The couple have been told they must not say they want to go to Germany, which is the destination of choice for most. Saying that means they'll likely be returned to Belarus.
Can you tell us whether they will be given the fair process to asylum that they deserve?
The couple stumble into the car with the border guards.
These people have now been taken away by the border guards. We don't know exactly where they will end up, but they're not the only people we've been in contact with here in the region.
Videos of 3 children sleeping on the freezing ground were sent to us from an Iraqi phone number just hours earlier. They sent us their location, which was over the border in Belarus.
Please.
We contacted this family through Renata, a local woman who showed us pictures of her providing them with food.
I was afraid of penalties. But as a human being, I have the right to help other people, to help another person, right?
Renata lives within the newly created exclusion zone at the border. Border guards refuse entry to anyone who doesn't live in the area, checking every car. It's 3 kilometers wide and runs the whole way up the frontier. Poland's border guards released this video, which they say shows Belarus's Alexander Lukashenko is preparing to send many more people. Untold numbers of people remain stranded in this vast forest, already bitterly cold and with winter coming.
That was Jack Parrick reporting from Poland. In the US, Michigan's governor has promised an all-hands-on-deck response to the state's latest lead water crisis. In the majority African-American city of Benton Harbor, residents have been told not to cook, drink, or even brush their teeth with tap water.
In Benton Harbor, the water is brown and people are seeing red.
Gotta wait a while in line for some water. Yeah. So I don't know what to do. I don't know.
For the second time in recent memory, the state of Michigan is taking years to clean up lead-tainted drinking water in a majority black city. When a visitor complained about the water, Reverend Edward Pinkney had it tested and found high levels of lead. He says there's a reason it's taking so long to remove it.
Environmental racism, just what it is. If a white woman would come, you see her on a camera with her little baby and she's crying and telling me that the lead is destroying her baby, they would send out the Army, FEMA would be here, the Pentagon would be here, everybody would be here. And they'll resolve this thing in less than 6 months. But by it being a black city, it's a whole different story.
2 years after the majority black town of Flint resolved a 5-year-long crisis with lead in its water, Benton Harbor's water is even more toxic.
My water sucks bad.
Does it make you mad?
Yes, because they tell us not to take a bath in it, brush our teeth, and none of this, but what else are we to do?
The most tainted samples from homes here contained 889 parts of lead per billion, 59 times the state's 15 parts per billion limit. On Thursday, with residents lining up for bottled water 3 years after the city discovered its taps were tainted, the state announced it would replace all of the city's underground lead pipes within 18 months.
This directive ensures that state government is taking a truly all-hands-on-deck approach.
The mayor is careful not to criticize the state leaders who have committed to replace the city's lead pipes, but he too raises the specter of racial discrimination.
I think that there's been some headway, but quite honestly, there's a long way to go because of the racial, not just insensitivity, but injustice
Here at Lake Michigan, the water is lead-free. It picks up the lead as it courses through the city's aging pipes. So there's water everywhere. It's just not safe to drink.
So far, the city has promises of $18 million of the $28 million it will take to replace all of its lead supply pipes. It will have to find the remaining $10 million somewhere to finish the project on time in 2023.
John Hendren reporting from Benton Harbor in Michigan. Virgin Galactic's space travel service is on hold until late next year. Its first commercial trip was scheduled for the third quarter of 2022, but will be delayed until the fourth quarter as the firm carries out crucial repairs and upgrades. It comes after routine tests showed a possible reduction in the strength margins of certain materials used on 2 spaceships. Shares in the company fell as much as 20% after the announcement. Meanwhile, 3 Chinese astronauts have docked with China's new space station. It's being hailed as a big achievement for the country's space program, which is quickly becoming one of the world's most advanced. Back here on Earth, a new era in Antarctic research has begun in Australia with the arrival of the icebreaker Noyina in Hobart this morning. The vessel spent almost 50 days at sea, travelling 24,000 kilometres from the Netherlands, where its construction was finished.
Weighing more than 25,000 tonnes and spanning 160 metres from bow to stern, the Noyina charges through the Southern Ocean swells with ease. Its name means Southern Lights in the Tasmanian Aboriginal language Palawakani. Noyina replaces Aurora Australis, which was decommissioned last year after serving Australia's Antarctic Division since 1989.
And this mighty vessel will indeed carry that light from our great Southland to another, Antarctica.
Noyina sailed into Hobart this morning, docking at the city's waterfront.
No, it drives really well. It makes me look like an expert. Yeah, if you can't park this ship, you shouldn't be driving a ship. It's really easy to drive.
The vessel is a $1.9 billion investment from the federal government. Construction alone cost $529 million. It can map the ocean floor to a depth of 11,000 metres, research polar weather patterns in the upper atmosphere, and can become a floating laboratory to monitor the health of oceans and marine ecosystems.
This really demonstrates our commitment to all of the activities that come from the Antarctic program.
The Noyina was meant to be greeted with a welcoming ceremony and celebrations, but the 3-day lockdown that began in southern Tasmania last night meant that those celebrations had to be cancelled. They will be scheduled for a later date.
It gives Hobart a strong identity and connection with the Southern Ocean, with the Antarctic. People strongly identify with it. And it's probably one of the few cities in the world where you're likely to bump into somebody that's been to Antarctica, for example.
Over the next 30 years, it will become one of those iconic elements in the Port of Hobart that for visitors and locals alike will signify Australia's presence in Antarctica.
The Noyina will make its first voyage to Antarctica this December for ice trials and to resupply some of the Australian stations. Sarah Maunder, SBS World News.
Coming up next, after 7 years of sobriety, this businessman is bringing low-alcohol beer to the world with a uniquely Australian twist. And how tragedy has failed to stop these Papua New Guinea cricketers seeking World Cup glory. Australia's relationship with alcohol is changing. Overall consumption has dropped by about 60% since the mid-1970s, and new figures suggest younger people are keen to cut back even more. A recent DrinkWise survey reveals 3 in 5 drinkers in the 18 to 24 age group want to consume less. And that's good news for manufacturers selling low and no alcohol products. During Indigenous Business Month, Small Business Secret spoke to one entrepreneur who is growing a global export business.
Alcohol has absolutely been destructive for our peoples. It's not something of ours. It's not part of our ways. It's not part of any of our cultures.
Clinton Schultz is a man on a mission.
After giving up alcohol himself, the father of 3 has a very personal reason to help people party without the hangover.
This year will be my 7th year that I've been sober, and I made that choice because I wanted my children to realise that you don't have to drink to socialise.
His sober beer has a tiny alcohol content, so it's not zero, but near enough.
It's impossible to get drunk off of a non-alcoholic product. There's actually more alcohol in an overripe banana.
SBS first met the Gamilaroi man at his Indigenous food truck, Clinton's Cup Murray. Since then, his beer, flavoured with native foods like pepperberry and finger lime, has taken off.
We're extremely proud for what we've been able to achieve in such a short time. It's only been 4 years.
Now, Clinton and his wife Lozen are growing their boutique brewery on Queensland's Gold Coast, and almost 600 investors have backed their vision.
We raised $1 million in about 10 days, which was far quicker than any of us expected, and that was an amazing thing to witness.
Clinton is clearly a great role model in this space and has developed a lot of innovative products that can help consumers cut back on their alcohol consumption.
While many Indigenous businesses have struggled during the pandemic, Sober has bucked the trend.
So last year we did sell 20,000 cartons of our main range alone, and we're intending to triple that.
Drinkwise says the trend away from full-strength drinks is encouraging.
But there are still some consumers drinking at risky levels, and that's why it is so important that people like Clinton are bringing out these low and zero alcohol products to really help people moderate their behaviour.
Sober has 700 distributors nationwide, though it's not just Australians who've developed a taste for this new brew.
We're now starting to expand overseas. So we started exporting into New Zealand about 3 months ago, and we're actually about to launch in both Hong Kong and Singapore.
By growing global exports, Clinton hopes to give back.
Helping support young First Nations peoples here on the Gold Coast to learn more about their identity, the positive aspects of who they are, to try and give them a solid grounding for their futures.
Natalie Armat, SBS World News.
For more stories on Australian entrepreneurs, click on the Small Business Secrets tab on the SBS News website or visit SBS On Demand. The ill-fated marriage of Princess Diana and Prince Charles has taken centre stage at a London film festival. It's not the first time Britain's royal family has been depicted in a less than complimentary manner, of course, but critics say this version of the story strays wildly from reality.
Gracing the red carpet, Kristen Stewart's the latest actor to lay her reputation on the line, playing one of the world's most photographed women. The doomed marriage of Princess Diana and Prince Charles has been depicted before, but Spencer, Diana's maiden name, is something darkly different.
We came at this with such love. Even if everyone hated it, it would be okay because we really did just put everything we had into it, and we love her so much and just wanted to understand her and sort of fantasize about her for an hour and a half. You know, I hope everyone likes it. I mean, I hope everyone loves it like as much as we love her.
Chilean director Pablo Larraín takes viewers beyond the news headlines into a gothic nightmare. Set over 3 days, it follows Diana as she reluctantly joins the royals for Christmas as her marriage to Prince Charles crumbles. There's eating, drinking and shooting and the ghosts of queens past. It's anything but a true story, and that doesn't seem to matter. Or does it?
The power of the story does make it fascinating, and from that point of view I was very intrigued by it. Equally, I did feel that the director knew how to cast Diana but not to tell a story with any link to fact.
Now, if you're expecting a royal reaction to all of this, well, think again. The House of Windsor is notoriously tight-lipped when it comes to unwanted attention, and it's precisely that silence that filmmakers have filled with their own interpretation of what's going on behind palace walls. Spencer follows the success of the Netflix series The Crown. 73 million households worldwide tuned into the royal drama, with season 5 starting in November. Netflix has been under pressure from British government ministers to issue a disclaimer making clear the show is fiction. Netflix has refused.
There was Neve Barker reporting from London. Well, Matt Cannellan joins us now with Saturday Night Sport, and there's excitement in Papua New Guinea ahead of the Cricket World Cup, Matt.
It sure is, Anton. It's not the country you'd usually expect, but PNG is just over 24 hours away from making its long-awaited entrance onto cricket's world stage. But the country's battle with COVID-19 has cast a long shadow over those preparations. Last month, Papua New Guinea celebrated its Independence Day, and the country's cricketers sent their congratulations from Oman, where they've been getting ready for their T20 Cricket World Cup debut. But since that day of national pride, the team has been hit by tragedy. In the space of 72 hours, COVID-19 cast a huge shadow over their preparations.
Nosai, our opening bowler, lost the dad. The really next morning, Charles Sammy Jr. lost the mom. And when we played Oman, when we went to the hotel after the game, a day-night match, Kipling Doriga, wicketkeeper, lost the mother. So it was a really difficult 3 days for us.
Tomorrow, the Barramundis, as they're called, will take on host nation Oman in the tournament opener. And despite the tragic backdrop, they're ready for their big moment under the watchful eyes of cricket fans around the globe.
Kicking off the tournament, the world's going to be watching the World Cup. It's one of the biggest events in the world, isn't it? One of the top 5 events in the world. So I just want them to stay focused, relax and play their game. And I think you'll see quite a good performance from these guys.
In a show of the team's unity and strength, the traumatic lead-in has only increased their self-belief.
I think that's one of our strengths. We are like brothers. We train together every day. We've been together for how many years now, so we stick together no matter what the situation is.
After the game against Oman, PNG will then face Scotland and Bangladesh.
Tough times our country is having back home. It's a really great opportunity for us to put a smile on the face of our people.
And I know all the 8-9 million people in PNG will be watching somewhere. They'll be cramming into their live streams or their TVs to watch the first couple of games.
If they can manage a top 2 finish in their group, they'll be through to the Super 12 section, where the big guns of Australia, India, England and New Zealand await. Given what they've been through, the Barramundi team will be the one that many neutrals will be happy to cheer on. John Baldock, SBS World News. Sad news in the horse racing world today, with reigning Cox Plate champion Sir Dragonet euthanised after breaking down at track work in Victoria this morning. The big race of the day at Caulfield saw Incentivise move into favouritism for the Melbourne Cup after the 5-year-old's dominant performance in the Caulfield Cup. The only shame was that there were no fans there to see Peter Moody win one of Australia's big 4 races, the Melbourne and Caulfield Cups, the Cox Plate and the Golden Slipper, for the first time. At Royal Randwick today, the richest race on turf, the $15 million Everest, was won by Nature Strip. The Chris Waller-trained galloper took the $6.2 million first prize ahead of the fast-finishing Masked Crusader and Eduardo. It was Nature Strip's 3rd attempt to win the race, the relaxed COVID restrictions in New South Wales helping to make the moment all the more special.
Yeah, getting a little bit emotional for a change. So just a great race. It's just captured the imagination of so many people inside racing and out, and what better way to get out of COVID than have a race day.
It's been a big couple of days for winning jockey James McDonald. He's been given a border exemption by the Victorian government so he can ride in next week's Cox Plate. World football's governing body FIFA is pushing ahead with its plans to hold a World Cup every 2 years. President Gianni Infantino is on a visit to Venezuela, where FIFA is looking to continue the advancement of the women's game. Despite opposition from several confederations, clubs, players and fan groups, Infantino says he wants to give more nations the chance to dream of World Cup glory.
La petición del Congreso de la FIFA, aprobada por el 88% de los miembros de la FIFA, nos ha pedido de analizar la posibilidad de reformar el calendario internacional de partidos, entonces cuando tienen que jugar las selecciones y, si es posible, jugar mundiales cada 2 años.
Infantino believes that with 200 nations now part of FIFA, as opposed to the 40 at the time of the first World Cup in 1930, more frequent tournaments will lead to greater inclusion. Formula One's governing body has approved a record 23-race calendar for 2022, but there's still no place for a Chinese Grand Prix. Shanghai has missed out for the third year in a row due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Races in Australia, Singapore, Canada and Japan, which were all cancelled for the past 2 seasons, were included. Bahrain will host the season opener in March, with Melbourne staging the Australian Grand Prix in April, the third race of the season. The FIA hopes new technical regulations for next season will encourage closer racing. And there'll be plenty of those races to see if they're right. Anton, that's today's sport.
Thanks, Matt. Well, coming up, the weather and...
There ain't no gold.
To the weather in the major centres now. Sunny in Sydney, Canberra and Brisbane. Partly cloudy in Melbourne, Adelaide and Alice Springs. Showers for Perth, Darwin and Cairns and overcast conditions in Hobart. Looking further afield, showers for Auckland and Nadi. Windy in Wellington and fine in Tahiti. In Southeast Asia, there'll be thunderstorms in Bangkok, rain for Honiara and a few showers for Phnom Penh. Further north, all clear in Beijing and Seoul, overcast in Hanoi and rain in Taipei and Tokyo. Heading west, fine in Beirut and Tehran, rain for Delhi, a few showers for Jerusalem. On to Europe, fine in Paris, Stockholm and Budapest, showers for Athens and Istanbul. In Africa, fine in Addis Ababa, showers in Nairobi, partly cloudy in Cairo. In South America, thunderstorms in Caracas, partly cloudy in Buenos Aires, fine in Santiago. And for North America, drizzle in New York City, fine in Chicago, rain in Vancouver and also Mexico City. Well, she's one of the biggest selling artists of the 21st century. And now, after a 6-year hiatus, Adele has finally released a new single. It comes ahead of the release of her 4th album, which will be called 30 next.
For the recording and stuff like that, but there's an element of hope in it, which in turn gave me hope, because I was at my wit's ends, in the beginning of 2019.
Heard that she'd broken up, you think, oh, there are going to be, inevitably, as sad as it is for everybody concerned, there are going to be some really good songs coming out of the pain that she's been through. And I really admire the honesty for her to talk about so openly what has happened and all the feelings that she's had.
Adele's new record comes with big expectations. She already has 15 Grammys, 1 Oscar and 9 Brit Awards. And she's inspired a new generation of artists, including fellow Brit nominee Joy Crooks.
I don't know what I do. I think the thing that Adele made me feel okay with is that I'm not afraid of ballads. I know that in my past, I've had friends when I was younger be like, why are you writing these kinds of songs? And I remember feeling a bit ashamed of my writing. And then the second thing is, amidst all her success, all of the things that could have changed her accolades, everything, she's just so real.
Oh yeah, maybe. Keep trying though. The other one was that I'm busy working, so that was the perfect response for me.
On me.
Adele ending that report from Mark Savage. Recapping our top stories now. At least 41 people have died in Kandahar following a suicide bombing at a Shiite mosque. ISK has claimed responsibility for the attack, the second they claim to have orchestrated in Afghanistan within a week. Long-serving British MP Sir David Amess has been stabbed to death in what police have deemed to be a terror attack. A 25-year-old man is in police custody. And a 15-year-old Victorian girl is among 9 Australian deaths from COVID-19 reported today. Victoria recorded just under 2,000 new infections. There were 319 in New South Wales and 20 in the ACT. That is the world this Saturday. If you've missed some of tonight's bulletin, you can catch up on the SBS News website shortly. And a reminder, you can also watch the bulletin live there or on the SBS News app. From the team, good night.